conservatism. Ideological conservatism. Yeah, I see a lot of people on the tubes and in the media that like to pass themselves off as conservatives. And they're not. They're radicals. And they're not radical conservatives. A lot of them aren't even radical right. They're just paranoid. And you see this with a lot of people that follow Ron Paul. Now, by saying that, I don't want to say that I believe Ron Paul is paranoid. I think he is, but not in the same way that people that follow him are. I think that Ron Paul is a traditionalist. I think that the world has passed him by. Not that that's a bad thing, but there's a certain break from reality that comes with his libertarian point of view. It's not 1780. It's 2009. We live in a very complex, interconnected world. In a world where more people understand each other than ever before. Not just in language, not just because a lot of people speak the same language, because they do. But also because we have mediums such as this that allow us to communicate through visual aids. I have friends that live in Southeast Asia that learned how to speak English from watching YouTube. There's a sadness that overcomes me when it comes to the ideological debates that I see on YouTube. Not just YouTube, but on the internet at large. You know, I'm also a member of a community, a smaller community of loggerheads. And I'm even saddened by the way people view that. You know, you listen to people saying it's a gated community and it's this and that. And it's not, you know, and I've had some issues, you know, and I've discussed them privately with the powers that be over there as well. And, there are times that loggerheads is my cup of tea, there are times it's not. It's a product. Just like YouTube, there are times that YouTube is my cup of tea, and there are times that it's not. It's a product. You know, and it's funny because when people disagree with you, especially if somebody responds to you, they say they pwned you. When, you know, when it comes to discussions of the human condition, there is no pwning. There's discussion. There's discourse. You know, one thing that I always was fascinated about our founding fathers was the idea of compromise. You had radicals on the equality side of things and radicals on the freedom side of things. And, you know, it got to a point where if we're going to set up this government and have a United States, you know, that we're going to have to compromise on what takes priorities. And there are certain things that took priorities when it came to individual freedoms, and there are certain things that took priority when it came to equality. And what's really cool about America is that we're still having that discussion. And not just here. I'd say the countries that are excelling are having those discussions. For instance, China is a country that is exponentially growing in influence and power. Maybe to the disappointment of some people in China. There is 3 points of view in both China and America. There's a very radical left point of view that you hear in China, Maoist, right? And there's a very radical left point of view you hear in America, you know. And regardless of what you all think, like the issue of gay rights is not radically left. It's not. The idea of socializing industry is For America, radically left. For America, that's radically left. For China, that's not. And I watched a video a little while ago from Fantastic Babblings where he talks about situational ethics. And he's not talking, that's not relativism. Situational ethics is not relativism. It's time and place kind of things. You're not going to deal with a 5-year-old in the same way you deal with a 22-year-old employee. That's situational ethics. That's not relativism per se. So in China, you have 3 schools of thought, right? You have the more leftist scholars, you have the much more Confucian conservative scholars, and you have the pragmatists. And you see that in America as well. In completely different ways, but the model's very similar, and that's why I think these 2 countries are very successful. And the reason why is because there's this ebb and flow, this conflict, this battling of left and right, of prioritizing equality and trying to make people equal, and allowing for individual freedoms, right? And you have this, and in China you see the polarizations much more clearly than you do here, and the reason you see that is because they have thousands of years worth of a Confucian model. Even before Confucius, there was a Confucian model within Asia, which is radically right. Yeah, it's a natural order, belief in a supreme kind of authority. And then you have this radically left idea, which is Marxist, and Marx was certainly radically left. And then you have the pragmatists that seem to be running the country now, that try to bring this underlying cultural ideology together with this more overt leftist ideology. And in America, Americans, for the most part, are center-left or center-right. Even our politicians are, as much as you don't want to believe that. As much as the left wants to call Bush a fascist, and as much as the right wants to call Obama a Marxist, they're not in any way. A socialist, a Marxist, wouldn't be handing trillions of dollars to private banks and private industry. And at the same time, a fascist wouldn't be allowing the kind of individual freedoms that Americans are accustomed to. And certainly the Patriot Act knocked that back, but you have both sides of the aisle that were part of that. But the Patriot Act is not fascist. There was only one American ever held under the Patriot Act, so I don't see fascism. There's certainly not a black shirt revolution going on there. And it seems to me that that balance seems to be that when you have a governing area, the balance is usually where you see the most success. And the times in this country that are most prosperous is where you see a more pragmatic approach to dealing with things, with conceding to certain individual liberties and having that side of the aisle concede to certain societal goods, collective goods, ebb and flow, and those things go back and forth, right? So, the whole argument is quality, freedom, collectivism, individualism. And America's always been about, if you look at American literature, it's always been about individualism. At the same time, our government's always been about more of a collective good, from even radical individualists like Jefferson did things for the collective good. So, in art, individuality seems to spring forth. And what's odd about that is, it seems that artists seem to lean politically to the left, which, seems to be a contradiction in terms. I don't know. I wanted to throw this all out there and see what you thought, and Phil, this is kind of a response to you, but, balance is where the conclusion I've come to is that there has to be a balance between individual liberties and a collective good, and the conflict between those two things, and the compromise between those two things, I think, is what makes for the best collective human condition.